Bang, bang, bang. The pounding on my front door was so loud it felt like the hinges might break, each hit vibrating through the walls and rattling the picture frames that lined my hallway. My coffee cup half full trembled on the table, the liquid inside sloshing dangerously close to the rim. HOA police. Open up. A deep authoritative voice barked from the other side. HOA police. I froze for a second, my brow furrowing in confusion. I'd lived in this neighborhood for just over a year, and I'd heard plenty of horror stories about overzealous HOA board members' petty fines for mailbox paint colors, nasty letters about improperly trimmed hedges, even threats over lawn gnomes. But HOA police? That was a new one. My curiosity got the better of me. I crept toward the door, my footsteps muffled on the carpet. Slowly, I leaned in and peered through the peephole. Two men stood on my porch in matching black uniforms, their shirts tucked in too tight, the fabric straining across their chests. Pinned over their left pockets were shiny but suspiciously cheap-looking badges, thin metal discs with a generic eagle emblem, the kind you'd find in a novelty store or a bad movie prop bin. Their belts were loaded with gear, clipped at the hip, a roll of zip ties hanging from a loop, and in the hand of the taller one a pair of handcuffs dangling like a threat. They didn't look like cops. They looked like the discount version of cops. One of them stepped closer, planting his boots firmly on my welcome mat. "We have a complaint against you," he announced, his tone dripping with forced authority. "Step outside immediately." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My instincts, honed over years of law enforcement training, told me something was way off here. Real officers don't speak like that. Real officers don't just show up in mismatched gear without clear identification or backup, and real officers certainly don't shout HOA police as if it's an actual department. Now, here's the thing, these guys had no idea who they were dealing with. I'm not just your average homeowner with a mortgage and a dog. I'm special. Agent Ryan Brooks, FBI. I've spent over a decade investigating everything from organized crime to interstate fraud, chasing down suspects who are a whole lot scarier than two porch-standing wannabes. I've trained with federal tactical units, learned to read micro-expressions in interrogation rooms, and more than once, I've been in situations where one wrong move could have ended me. And these guys? They didn't have the posture, the stance, or the confidence of law enforcement. They were faking a tan, not even faking it well. Still, I didn't let my guard down. Pretenders can be dangerous, sometimes more dangerous than the real thing, because they don't have rules to follow. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes scanning their uniforms again. No patches, no department insignias, no name tags. The badges looked like they'd been stamped out of tin and polished to a blinding shine to make up for their lack of legitimacy. My mind raced through possibilities. Extortion, a scam, some personal vendetta from an HOA board member who didn't like my front lawn. It wouldn't be the first time I'd been targeted for sticking my nose into something shady. I leaned against the wall, out of their line of sight, and listened. One of them whispered something to the other, too soft for me to catch every word, but I heard enough to know they weren't here for a friendly chat. They were talking about taking him in and making sure the truck's ready. Take me in where? Exactly. I stepped quietly into my office, reached into the drawer, and pulled out my FBI badge. I ran my thumb over the gold seal, the weight of it familiar and grounding. Alongside it, I retrieved my sidearm, a Glock 19. I didn't plan to use it unless I had to, but I knew better than to meet an unknown threat empty-handed. Returning to the door, I straightened my shoulders and composed my face into something neutral, but unreadable. I wanted to see what they'd try next. "Sir," the taller man barked again from the porch, "this is your final warning. Step outside, or we will forcibly remove you from the property." That was almost funny. Forcibly remove me from my own property under the authority of a made-up police force. I turned the deadbolt but kept the chain in place, opening the door just wide enough to make eye contact. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked evenly. The shorter one stepped forward, shoving a crumpled sheet of paper toward me. It was supposed to look official, but it was just a printed form with HOA citation in big bold letters and a few handwritten accusations underneath. Unauthorized landscaping, parking in a restricted zone, harboring dangerous animals. Dangerous animals? I almost snorted. The only animal in this house was Max, my golden retriever, who was currently sprawled across the couch inside, snoring like a freight train. I kept my expression blank. "You'll have to forgive me," I said, "but I'm not aware of any legal authority called HOA police." The taller one smirked, clearly enjoying the little performance. "Oh, it's real," he said, "and you're about to find out just how real." I let a slow smile spread across my face. Not a friendly smile, but the kind that says, "You have no idea the mistake you've just made," because in that moment, I knew exactly how this was going to play out. They thought they were intimidating some random homeowner into compliance. They had no clue they'd just tried to muscle an FBI agent, and I was about to turn their little HOA power trip into the worst day of their lives. I opened the door just enough to create a narrow gap, keeping the chain lock in place. My eyes flicked from one man to the other, assessing their posture, their tone, the way they carried themselves. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, letting my voice stay calm, and even the kind of tone that doesn't give away a single emotion. The taller one grinned, like he'd just caught a criminal in the act. From his pocket, he yanked out a crumpled piece of paper, creased, smudged, and clearly handled too many times, and waved it in front of me as if it were a royal decree. "This is an official HOA violation notice," he announced dramatically, his voice rising at the end like a TV judge passing a sentence. "You've been cited for unauthorized landscaping, parking in a restricted zone," and he paused to let the tension build, then smirked, "harboring dangerous animals." For a moment, I just stared at him. My mind immediately pictured Max, my golden retriever, sprawled out on the couch in his usual spot, lazily licking one paw with the kind of pure indifference only a dog can manage. Dangerous. Max was more likely to roll over for a belly rub than bite anyone. I almost laughed right there, but years in the FBI had trained me to keep my expressions under control. "I think you've got the wrong house," I said smoothly, tilting my head slightly, as if I was giving them the benefit of the doubt. That's when the shorter one stepped forward, puffing his chest out like a rooster trying to look bigger than it actually is. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, and he spoke in a tone that screamed wannabe authority figure. "Sir, we are the HOAS law enforcement branch. If you don't comply, we will arrest you and seize your property." I blinked, pretending to process his words, though inside my mind was running through 100 red flags. "HOAS, law enforcement branch," I repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. Then I raised one eyebrow. "That's not a thing." The tall one crossed his arms and leaned in slightly, trying to loom over me. "It is in this neighborhood," he said, drawing out the last 3 words like he was delivering some kind of ominous threat. His eyes locked on mine, waiting for me to flinch or back down. IDN, single quotes T. In fact. I let the silence hang there just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably on their feet. They thought they were holding all the power in this conversation, but they didn't realize they'd already lost the upper hand the moment they stepped onto my porch, because while they were talking, I'd already done what I always do when something doesn't smell right. I'd activated the recording device in my pocket, a small high-quality audio recorder, the kind you'd never noticed unless you knew exactly where to look. Years in the bureau had drilled one golden rule into my head: always collect evidence before you make a move. The moment you confront someone, without proof, you lose control of the narrative. But if you've got their words, their tone, and their threats captured, that's a weapon you can use later, in ways they'll never see coming. As the recorder silently documented every syllable, I studied them closely. Their so-called uniforms didn't match different brands of black tactical pants, shirts that weren't quite the same shade of black, and cheap Velcro patches sewn unevenly on the sleeves. The badges clipped to their chests were shiny, sure, but too thin and lightweight to be real. I could tell from here they weren't issued by any legitimate agency. The shorter one shifted from foot to foot, glancing toward the street like he was impatient for something or someone. That little flick of his eyes told me more than he realized. They weren't just here to talk. They had some kind of plan, waiting outside. The taller one, on the other hand, seemed determined to play the part of the enforcer. "You can make this easy or hard," he said, his tone laced with fake patience. "But if you resist, we have the right to detain you, under HOA authority." HOA authority. That phrase alone almost made me snort. These guys had clearly memorized a script, and they were doing their best to sell it, but I could already see the cracks forming. Still, I wasn't about to tip my hand yet. I wanted them comfortable enough to talk, comfortable enough to slip up, and given how sloppy they already were, it wouldn't take much to make that happen. I leaned casually against the doorframe, tilting my head just enough to look curious instead of combative. "All right," I said slowly. "Why don't you tell me exactly how this works?" Their shoulders loosened ever so slightly, thinking they'd just hooked me. Good. Let them think they were in control. In reality, every second they kept talking was another nail in their own coffin. What they didn't know, and what they were about to find out, was that they weren't dealing with some nervous homeowner about to fold under pressure. They were standing on the porch of a man trained to dismantle lies, expose scams, and take down people who thought they could fake their way through power. And as far as I was concerned, their little game had just begun. I decided, right then and there, to play along just to see how far these clowns would take it. I'd learned over the years that when people are bluffing, the best way to catch them is to give them just enough rope to hang themselves. And judging by the way these two were carrying themselves, it wouldn't take long. "All right," I said, deliberately adding a slight quiver to my voice, the kind of nervousness that would make them feel powerful. What do you need me to do?" It worked instantly. Their expressions shifted from tense intimidation to smug satisfaction. Their eyes lit up like they'd just won the lottery. The shorter one, clearly the mouthpiece of the pair, stepped forward with his hands on his hips like a TV cop. "First," he declared, "you're coming with us to the HOA security office for processing." I nodded slowly, pretending to consider this like I had no idea what was happening. "Processing," I echoed, just to keep them talking. The tall one smirked, as if they'd just trapped me in their web. "Yes, sir, it's standard procedure. You'll answer some questions, sign a few papers, and then, well, That depends on your level of cooperation. I followed their gaze toward the curb, where their so-called police vehicle sat parked, a beat-up, late-model SUV that had clearly seen better days. Faded black paint, rust creeping around the wheel wells, and the piece de resistance. Magnetic déceleps slapped on the doors in blocky white letters reading HOA enforcement. The edges of the magnets were peeling, curling away from the metal like old wallpaper in a damp room. I let my eyes wander over the vehicle, cataloging every detail. No cage partition between the front and back seats. No mounted radio or in-car computer. In fact, the only things visible inside were fast food wrappers crumpled on the passenger seat, a greasy paper bag in the footwell, and a dented flashlight rolling lazily back and forth on the floor as the breeze rocked the SUV. This wasn't a police vehicle, it was a prop, and a bad one at that. I turned back to them, keeping my face as neutral as possible. "Okay," I said. "Let me just grab my wallet." The short one nodded curtly, clearly believing I was complying. "Make it quick," he ordered. I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me. The moment I was out of sight, my entire demeanor changed. Feigned nervousness vanished, replaced by the steady focus that had gotten me through countless high-risk operations. I walked straight to the small table in my front hallway, where I kept a locked drawer for personal items I didn't leave lying around. I unlocked it and reached inside, not for my wallet, but for the tools that would instantly change the power dynamic in this situation. First, my badge. The gold FBI seal caught the light as I pulled it from its leather case. The weight of it was familiar, grounding. I clipped it to my belt where it could be seen easily when I wanted it to be, and hidden when I didn't. Single quotes T. Next. My Glock 19, smooth, well-maintained, and loaded. I didn't draw it, and I didn't intend to unless they gave me a reason. But I'd been in this game long enough to know you never walk into a potentially hostile situation unprepared. I tucked the weapon discreetly at my side, making sure the jacket I wore would conceal it until I chose otherwise. I took one deep breath, centering myself. This wasn't going to be a shouting match or a brawl. This was going to be a controlled takedown executed on my terms. When I opened the door and stepped back outside, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Their smiles, those smug, self-satisfied grins they'd been wearing like badges of honor, disappeared almost instantly. Their eyes darted to the badge now clipped to my belt, then back up to my face. Didn't say a word at first. I just let the silence stretch, the weight of my presence pressing down on them. The short one's bravado wavered, his jaw twitched, and his stance shifted from confident to cautious. The taller one's eyes narrowed, scanning my beltline, probably realizing this wasn't going to be the easy intimidation job they'd thought it was. I met both their gazes, one after the other, letting them serially see that the man standing in front of them wasn't the frightened homeowner they'd imagined. I was someone who'd been trained to read people, to dismantle lies, and to end situations like this before they spiraled out of control. They didn't know it yet, but the game had just flipped. "Gentlemen," I said, stepping fully out onto the porch, the warm afternoon sun hitting my face, "I've decided we should handle this differently." The taller one's confident expression faltered, just slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave as if bracing for something he couldn't quite identify. I let the moment hang for a second, then slowly reached for my jacket. My movements were deliberate, controlled. I pulled the fabric back just enough for the sunlight to catch on the gold seal clipped to my belt. The polished metal gleamed, instantly commanding attention. "Special Agent Ryan Brooks," I said evenly, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "FBI." The short one let out a sharp, almost dismissive laugh, the kind people give when they think you're bluffing. But the sound died in his throat when I flipped open the leather badge case, holding it at chest level for them to see. Clearly, the holographic emblem, the embossed lettering, the unmistakable weight of authenticity. It wasn't a toy, and it certainly wasn't for show. The taller man's mouth went slack, his gaze locked on the badge. The short one's smirk evaporated, replaced by a tight, twitching jaw. And just like that, the fake authority they'd been carrying like a shield crumbled, the color drained from their faces. Their bodies stiffened, shoulders hunching as if instinctively trying to make themselves smaller. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my tone shifting into the calm, commanding cadence that had ended more than one standoff in my career. "You're going to put your hands where I can see them. You're going to sit down on that porch step, and you're going to explain to me exactly who sent you here, and why you're pretending to be law enforcement." They didn't move for too long, tense seconds. They just stared at me, calculating, maybe hoping I was bluffing, maybe realizing they had just stepped into a very deep hole. I took one step forward. My boots hit the wooden porch with a solid thud. My eyes locked. "On theirs now?" I said just one word, low and sharp, but loaded with the kind of authority that doesn't invite negotiation. That broke them. The tall one lowered himself onto the step so fast, it was almost comical, his knees bending awkwardly, as if his legs had forgotten how to work. The short one tripped over his own boots in his hurry to comply, landing heavily beside his partner. They sat there, side by side, their hands raised in plain view. The swagger they'd arrived with nowhere to be found. The short one's breathing had gone shallow, his chest rising and falling too quickly. The tall one kept darting glances toward the street, as though expecting backup that was never coming. I stayed standing, keeping my position above them physically and psychologically. "Let's start from the top," I said. "Who sent you?" They exchanged a quick, nervous look, each waiting for the other to speak. When neither did, I leaned forward slightly. "You might want to answer before I make a phone call that changes your lives in ways you really won't like." The short one swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. It was Linda," he stammered finally. She's on the HOA board." "And why?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and controlled. "Would an HOA board member send two people dressed as fake cops to my house?" The tall one hesitated, then blurted, "She said you were a problem, that you were looking into stuff you shouldn't be. She just told us to scare you, make you leave." I let their words hang in the air, watching them squirm under the weight of their own confession. My recorder was still running in my pocket, capturing every syllable. "You realize impersonating a federal officer is a federal crime," I said, letting each word drop like a hammer. "And right now, you've got about 30 seconds to start being a lot more helpful if you want to see daylight before the end of the year." The short one's shoulders slumped in defeat. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered. "Too late for that," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Now you're going to sit right there while I call the real police. And you're going to tell them exactly what you just told me." Neither of them argued. They just sat there, heads bowed, as the reality of their situation settled in. For them, the game was over. For me, it was just getting started. "Gentlemen," I said, stepping out onto the porch with slow, deliberate steps, "I've decided we should handle this differently." The tall one's smug expression faltered, his eyebrows knitting together. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but there was a hint of unease creeping in. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached down, pulled back the side of my jacket, and let the sunlight catch on the badge clipped to my belt. The gold emblem practically blazed in the light. "Special Agent Ryan Brooks, FBI?" The short one actually chuckled at first, like he thought I was bluffing, but his smirk evaporated the second I reached into my inside pocket and flipped open the leather badge case, letting him see the real deal official seal, my photo, credentials. This wasn't some novelty item you could buy online. The color drained from their faces so fast it was like watching paint peel in reverse. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm but with a razor-sharp edge that left no room for argument. "You're going to put your hands where I can see them. You're going to sit down on that porch step, and you're going to explain to me slowly and clearly exactly who sent you here and why you're pretending to be law enforcement." For a split second, they didn't move. I could see the gears turning in their heads, weighing whether to run, fight, or comply. But then I took one step forwards, just one end. That was all it took. "Now," I said, and the word cracked like a whip. They dropped onto the step so fast they nearly tripped over each other, elbows bumping, knees knocking. The short one's fake bravado was gone, replaced by darting eyes and a twitching jaw. The tall one stared straight ahead like if he didn't blink. Maybe I'd disappear. I positioned myself at the edge of the porch, close enough to keep control, but far enough that they knew I wasn't joking about maintaining a tactical advantage. My right hand rested casually but intentionally near my sidearm. "Let's start with something simple," I said. "Your name's—" They hesitated. The tall one finally muttered, Mike." "Full name," I snapped. "Michael Torres." The short one swallowed hard. "Kevin Miller." "All right, Mike and Kevin," I said, my tone deceptively even. "What exactly possessed you to throw on knockoff uniforms, slap magnetic decals on a beat-up SUV, and show up here claiming to be HOA police?" Kevin shifted uncomfortably. We were just hired for a job, man." "By who?" I pressed. Mike avoided my gaze. "Some guy from the HOA board said there was a resident causing trouble, not following the rules. Paid us cash to come escort you to the security office." "Escort me," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "And did he happen to mention that impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime? Or that showing up at a federal agent's home under false pretenses could land you in prison for a very long time?" They both looked like they wanted to melt into the floorboards. Kevin stammered, "We didn't know you were FBI. We thought you thought what?" I cut in sharply. "That you could scare me into compliance. That I'd just climb into your junkyard special of a patrol car without asking questions." Silence. Just the sound of their breathing and the faint hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. I leaned in slightly. "Here's what's going to happen next. You're going to sit right here until the real police arrive. You're going to hand over your fake badges, your fake IDs, and any paperwork you have from this job. And then, you're going to start praying that your boss has enough money to get you a decent lawyer." Mike opened his mouth to protest, but one look from me shut him up instantly. I pulled out my phone, dialed the local police department, and kept my eyes locked on them the entire time. They didn't move an inch. For the first time since they showed up, they looked exactly like what they were, two scared con men who'd just realized they'd messed with the wrong person.